All right, welcome back to the Big Stuff Podcast. Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania. Elton, we're heading down the home stretch. It's March. I got fired up on Twitter. I put one shining moment on my feed. It's getting near that time of year. Heading down the home stretch, and Maryland at 13-5, a one-game lead over Illinois and Michigan State and Wisconsin for the overall conference title race. And Maryland, of course, they had a chance to really put the hammer down, but lost at home to Michigan State. But how do you see things unfolding down the stretch? Do you think Maryland is going to hold on, or do you think we may have another split title like we did last year with Michigan State and Purdue?
Honestly, the way this thing's looking, it would not surprise me to see a split title. What's crazy that Maryland has not won a regular season Big Ten crown since it's been a member of the Big Ten, which I thought was really odd because Maryland's had some really good teams. But, hey, you can look at this and say, had things gone a bit differently in Minnesota last week, Maryland would have kind of been looking up at the others, but they squeaked out of Minneapolis with a 74-73 win. Maryland's got two tough games left. Maryland goes to Rutgers on Tuesday and closes out the season at home against number 25 Michigan on the 8th. So I don't know. Maryland has been playing well all year. We also can get Maryland team that seems to have its lulls and its inconsistencies, and Maryland's going to have to play, spotless basketball in these next two games if it wants to win that regular season Big Ten crown. But I think as it stands right now, to answer your question, I'm leaning more towards favoring a split team championship. What about you?
Yeah, Maryland, I think to me, it's very interesting. Even they kind of had that miracle win against Minnesota. And then, Mark Turgeon is complaining about the late game and having to go, come in at 4 a.m. And you just got to wonder, their mindset, you got to, it was a great comeback, and they've had great comebacks all year. But, you've got to tough it out here and finish this off. It can't be, it's not going to be easy sledding. And every team is dealing with these, 9 p.m. starts. This isn't just, a Mark Turgeon, conspiracy theory thing. So I think this, the game Tuesday night at the Rack against Rutgers is going to be really telling. Rutgers has been so good at home. Rutgers really needs this game as, one of the teams has kind of fallen on the bubble here of late. I'll be curious to see, how Maryland, and of course this will come out on Wednesday, but how they respond on Tuesday night. I'm going to be very curious to see because you don't want that negative momentum, heading not only late to the regular season, but the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament.
Exactly. And that's the thing, you look at teams who may have started hot to begin the year or even, midway through the year and kind of fizzle out in the end. And then you look at teams, that kind of took a while to get going, but once it did, it's just sustained that momentum. And you definitely got to say, I've got more faith in those teams that are closing out strong rather than the ones that are closing out.
Yeah, and Elton, I think that, certainly Michigan State, you look at them and what they did on the road Saturday night, that's certainly impressive. They're going to have Penn State on Tuesday night, which, I know you're going to be going to in less than an hour. The Penn State's another team, that's been a little shaky the last couple of weeks. And, the Myron Jones health status has been a little bit of a mystery. And how do you see them kind of riding in the form? And is there kind of a bounce back in them, do you think, these next couple of weeks?
Well, look, this could possibly, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this will be the toughest test that Penn State has faced all year. Michigan, I know, Tom Izzo, after he beat Maryland, said that, I guess some people were a little upset last week with, Maryland beating Minnesota, kind of putting Michigan State back a little bit. But Izzo, I guess, told them and he told his players, look, we handle business against Maryland, we handle business against Penn State, and we'll be in good position. So, Michigan State's going to come in here with a lot to prove. They're 20-9 on the season, really turned it around, playing very well, coming off of a big road win at College Park over the weekend. Cassius Winston, the last time Penn State and Michigan State played, Penn State won for the just the second time in 25 tries out there at the Breslin Center. And Cassius Winston had 2 free throws that he uncharacteristically missed in those closing minutes. He still scored a team-high 25 points, but you got to think, this is Cassius Winston wants to redeem himself, and what better chance to do that against the same team that beat him last go-round? And, this is a game that Penn State has to win. Myron Jones, when in that Penn State win earlier last month, scored a team-high 20 points. He returned to the court for the first time in 6 games, over the weekend. But one thing, you got to wonder is after sitting out for 6 games, you can't just put him back in there and expect him to be at 100%. So you're going to have to kind of build him up, build his wind up a little bit, just get him back into, get him back into game mode, and they're going to have to do that quickly against Michigan State.
Yeah, I mean, how does he look to you physically? How does Myron look?
He looked fine. He played 23 minutes against Iowa. He had 4 points, a block, a steal, and an assist. But you could tell that he was physically fatigued after a little while out there, and that's to be expected after missing 6 games. But I have no doubt that they really worked him since then on the short term, Saturday to Tuesday, just 3 days. But I think this is the game that he's really going to be asked to put a lot on his shoulders.
Yeah, let's turn to the hottest team in the Big Ten right now, the Wisconsin.
I know where you're going with this. Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's been really amazing to see, and they squeaked one out against Minnesota on Sunday night, but really impressive win in Ann Arbor. This is a team that they lost Kobe King during the season, but really it hasn't fazed them. I mean, they're just getting really balanced scoring, really good contributions, and you take a look at a guy like Brad Davidson, Brevin Pritzel, Akeem Ford. Aleem Ford, excuse me. Kind of like a no-name team, but a team that really has come on of late.
Yeah, this is a team that I saw play back in January. I believe January 11th. Penn State beat Wisconsin 58-49, and just watching Wisconsin basketball over the years, and they just looked really out of sorts. This wasn't Wisconsin basketball. You fast forward a month, almost 2 months, in the calendar, they've won 7 in a row. 6 in a row in 7 of their last 8. That includes wins against Michigan State, Ohio State, Rutgers, Michigan, Minnesota. These aren't slouch teams, Look at the way the rest of the season shaped up for Wisconsin. Host Northwestern, which is either last or next to last. I believe they're last in the conference. Northwestern on Wednesday, and then close out against Indiana. We talked about that momentum, and what better team right now is there's no better team that's played better than Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's amazing. 8 teams this week in the AP Top 25, and Wisconsin is one of them at number 24. It just tells you, the depth of this league. And now when you look at the 3 teams that aren't ranked in the top 25, but that still kind of have those bubble aspirations, you've got Rutgers, you've got Indiana, and you've got Purdue. Rutgers at 9-9 in the league. Indiana and Purdue both 8-10. Really a huge week. Purdue goes to Iowa, and then they're at home against Rutgers. And that Purdue-Rutgers game, particularly if Rutgers loses to Maryland, that could really be almost a de facto playing game for the tournament.
It could. Because, like I said, I'm not taking anything away from Purdue, but Iowa's playing really well right now also. I don't see them, especially going to Carver, Hawkeye Arena, I do not see Purdue getting out of there with the win, so that puts them at 15-15 on the season. Like you said, man, a win against Rutgers, a team that is kind of sitting on the bubble, a team that's really good. But I just, I know they were, when they came to Penn State last week, they were, that was their 3rd consecutive loss. But I know Rutgers still, the name still carries weight in college basketball this year. So a win by Purdue over Rutgers could really do a lot to boost their tournament hopes. The good thing for them is that it's in Indiana, not in New Jersey.
Yeah, and certainly, Purdue really impressive at Mackey Arena, especially when that crowd gets going. And certainly I saw that firsthand over the weekend when they just completely smothered Indiana. And Indiana took a lot of bad shots. And then Indiana, they go to Illinois, they play a lot better, but they come up short 67-66. They just have that kind of one little low. And now Indiana's 8-10. I guess, the good news for the Hoosiers is they finish up with 2 games at home. where they've played better this season, and certainly have picked up a lot of their big wins at Assembly Hall. So they get a rematch with Minnesota on Wednesday night, and then Saturday host Wisconsin, the hottest team in the Big Ten, which is, certainly it's not going to be an easy task, but for Indiana this week, obviously if you can get one or two or both of these games, I think you're feeling pretty good about yourself as far as your NCAA tournament aspirations are concerned.
You definitely want to get Minnesota. I mean, if you don't, that's 3 losses in a row. You don't get that one. I do not see Indiana beating Wisconsin. That's 4 losses in a row, and you can essentially just kind of bury your postseason hopes if that happens. So, very interesting. I wanted to ask you about this. I heard Archie Miller's was it post game? Was it at the press conference, or was he speaking to the radio when he kind of let loose a little bit?
Yeah, he had an S-bomb or two in the post game press conference.
Did you ask him that question to elicit that response, or?
I didn't. No, I did not. But he was very short. He only took about 3 questions. There was a little bit of frustration. There were a couple of questionable calls late in that Illinois game. Was Rob Finney tripped? Obviously. And then they were down 2, and Al Durham took a shot, and it looked like he got hit on the hand, and it wasn't called, and it was an air ball 3. That could have been 3 free throws to take the lead. So a lot of would have, could have, should have in that game. And amazingly enough, it was the first game of the season where Trace Jackson Davis got a double-double, and
really, that's amazing considering the season he's had.
Yeah, and didn't win. No, first game where he got a double-double, didn't win.
Okay, I was about to say.
So 9-0, they were 9-0 entering that game when Trace had a double-double, and first one that he had that they didn't win. So 9-1 in those games now. But Kofi Coburn for Illinois really picked it up in the second half, 15 points and 6 blocks.
He's the real deal.
They made a defensive adjustment in the second half. Trace was really having his way with Kofi in the first half in man coverage. He had 10 points, 5 rebounds, was really active. So in the second half, they put Georgie Benshavi on Trace and kind of had Kofi Coburn kind of lurking in the back, and that's how Kofi got all those kind of strong side block shots. It was really amazing to see. Some of those slots, and it was. A tough loss for Indiana because, they shot the ball reasonably well. They were 8 of 16 from 3. They did a lot of things well in that game. And, in Archie Miller's radio show on Monday night, he feels like that, the Hoosiers are in a good place mentally and that they have, they had that blowout loss a couple of weeks ago at Michigan, which was a little bit of rock bottom. They lose by 25. But since then, he thinks that the effort and the maturity and the attention to detail has been consistent. It hasn't always shown up on the scoreboard. They're 2-2 during that stretch. But they have, he thinks, played reasonably better. They got a road win against Minnesota. They won at home at Penn State. And I think he's hoping that will bear fruit this week in terms of how they play and really how they fight this week. That's going to be really important.
Well, the interesting thing is in the loss to Purdue in Indiana, the loss to Purdue and Illinois were by combined 9 points. So, like you said, the game against Illinois, one of those shots, falls differently, and we're looking at, 3-1 in their last 4 games going into that Minnesota game with that momentum. So I definitely can understand his frustration and those players' frustration as well.
Yeah, it was, listen, Elton, it's just not easy on the road in this league. We all know that. Indiana finished up 2-8 on the road in league play this year. But I guess, the other kind of good news for Indiana is, and when we get to the Big Ten tournament next week, it's right up the road in Indianapolis. It's really a bus ride.
Well, the fatigue won't be a factor. The travel fatigue won't be a factor.
Exactly, yeah. So they will... and, maybe have, some fans, too, which would be big as well. So that certainly could help them. But I think first they have to, put their focus and really get through this week. So coming up, we're going to have a special guest. He works for FS1, a former head coach at UCLA and St. John's, and worked at Purdue a long time with Gene Katie. Steve Lavin from FS1 will be coming up on the Big Stuff Podcast. This is Kevin Brockway with Elton Hayes. Welcome back to the Big Stuff Podcast. Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania. And we're joined by a special guest. He's a San Francisco native who played his college basketball, started his career at San Francisco State, and went on to Chapman. Started his coaching career in the Big Ten at Purdue under Gene Cady before going on to become an assistant coach under Jim Herrick during the national championship season in 1995 at UCLA. Then became the head coach at UCLA for 7 seasons. Later was the head coach at St. John's for 5 seasons. Very successful coaching run. 8 NCAA tournaments, 1 Elite 8, 5 Sweet 16s as well, and also a very well-known broadcaster. Started his career at ESPN, now is at Fox Sports 1 and the Pac-12 Network. Steve Lavin. Steve, pleasure to have you on.
Great to be with you, fellas. Great time of the year.
Thanks for joining us, Coach.
I know. It is an interesting time of year in March. And, when you're looking at the Big Ten right now, we're in the first week of March. You've got 8 teams in the top 25 still, 10 or 11 teams, Steve, that are, really still in contention for the field for the NCAA tournament. Is this as deep and strong as you've seen the league?
Yeah, I think you have to consider this one of the great years in Big Ten history. And yet you also have to create the criteria in terms of, what makes a conference great. Is it the number of teams capable of winning a national championship? Is it the number of teams in terms of depth that are capable of punching a ticket to the NCAA tournament? But regardless of how you create the criteria to define what greatness is for a conference, the Big Ten is having a remarkable season, and the numbers bear that out in terms of the net rankings, the number of teams in the top 25, and the overall strength of the conference. Even if you look at it from an optics standpoint and put the numbers aside, the competitiveness night in, night out, the number of improved teams from last season to this season is what makes the Big Ten so unique, and it's why it's been a banner season.
Yeah, Coach, and it's interesting, the physicality of the league. This has always been known as a physical league, but it seems like this year, even more with a number of big guys, you've got Kofi Coburn, you've got Daniel Otaro, you've got Xavier Tillman, it seems like every team has that one big Luka Garza, maybe not as physical, but more skilled, but the night in, the night out pounding, I wonder how that's going to play in March, and does it play to the league's advantage or not, or are we going to see a bunch of teams that when they get to the NCAA tournament are going to get worn down? I'm curious about your thoughts.
Well, I think the defensive-minded approach of so many Big Ten teams favors the conference when they get into the postseason, because if you look at the analytics of the metrics, through the years, once you step into the NCAA tournament, the pace tends to be a bit more deliberate, and scoring comes down some. There are exceptions, of course, but for the most part, the vast majority of years demonstrate that those scores do come down. They're lower volume possession games, and I think the Big Ten historically has been comfortable playing at a more deliberate pace with that defensive mindset, and the physical approach as well is something that has benefited the Big Ten. Overall, you can build a case, of course, and show examples where it's hurt them, but I'd say overall, if you take a sample size of, let's say, the last 2 decades, I think the style of play of the Big Ten helps the conference when they get into the postseason based on their ability to impose their preferred will and their preferred style of play on opponents in the NCAA tournament.
Hey, Coach, this is Elton Hayes. I cover Penn State for CNHI Pennsylvania. Thanks for hopping on with us this afternoon.
Oh, absolutely. Glad to be with you.
Thank you. Well, Coach, Penn State, much like other teams this year in the conference, has had its share of highs and lows. Penn State's, went 1-1 last week and is entering these last 2 games of the conference, just looking for momentum to close out the regular season, on a positive note. we always hear about teams not wanting to peak too early into the season. And I just wanted to, in your experience, what do you feel is ideal for a team, things that you look for outside of scores when evaluating a team's postseason chances and prospects?
Well, one of the things that's key to tournament success is guard play, and also having a player that you can go to in late game situations. And Penn State clearly has that in Lamar Stevens. When you look at his consistency, double-figure score in 28 of 29 games for the Nittany Lions this year, and has elevated his scoring in Big Ten play. He was impressive in the non-conference, I think close to 17 points per game, but even improved upon that in conference play. And returning with that experience from last year, he's an all Big Ten conference performer. So that's big in terms of Penn State being able to have a player they can play through. And, last year, Purdue, the Elite Eight run, Carson Edwards was a playmaker, a shot maker, and someone they could rely on in terms of consistently performing. And that's what Purdue has struggled with this year, is they don't know what they're going to get game to game. There hasn't been a consistent go-to player, and it's led to some uneven play by Purdue. Also, Penn State shoots the three-point, they shoot well from the three-point line, and that helps them. And yet they're still stout in terms of their two-point field goal percentage and being able to beat teams in the paint and kind of out-physical teams, and that's what's allowed them to have a really special season. So all those things help Penn State. I think the biggest question will be, how do they respond to their, being in the NCAA tournament? Because it's one thing to have experience and have your nucleus back. It's another thing when you face teams that have NCAA tournament experience and have had success in the NCAA tournament, a familiarity with tournament conditions, and that's what they're likely to face in their second round game, if not their first round game. And that's where the rubber meets the road. I know at St. John's, for me, my first year, we had a group that I inherited that had never been to an NCAA tournament, and we had an outstanding season, finished third place, but we got to the NCAA tournaments and faced a Gonzaga team that was experienced and got bumped out. And then we started over in my last year at St. John's. We punched through to the NCAA tournament, but not one player on that team in 2015 had been to the tournament, and we ended up getting knocked out by San Diego State, who had tournament experience and had success in the tournament. So I like Penn State. I think they've had an outstanding season. I like the way they're built. I think they're a second weekend team. If they can get through those, that first weekend of play and dealing with the nerves of being in an NCAA tournament and having success in the tournament.
Okay. Coach, I want to kind of go back. You mentioned Lamar Stevens. You kind of extolled a lot of his virtues. Penn State tonight will recognize Stevens among other members of the senior class after the Michigan State game. Stevens withdrew from the NBA draft last year to return for his senior season, and that's after, leading the Big Ten in scoring last year. I believe he is fifth in the league in scoring right now. And I just wanted to ask you, from a coaching standpoint, how have you seen his game become even more refined or developed this season?
Well, he's added, dimensions. He's a multi-dimensional player now, and he's contributing at both ends of the floor in terms of having a positive influence on the game for Penn State. And that shows maturation, and it shows someone that cares about their craft and goes about working in a manner to continue to improve his skill set and his tools to help his team win, but also set the table for a bright future for himself beyond his years at Penn State. And so, it's clear he's someone that cares about the game, loves the game, respects the game, and that's why he works at it in a manner that has led to the career he's had, which has been so impressive.
Thank you, Coach.
Coach Lavin, the Indiana-Purdue, you called the game last week. I'm curious about your thoughts about how they're kind of both playing heading down the stretch.
Well, Indiana, I still think will end up, punching through to the NCAA tournament. They've really had no, bad losses. They're 10-0 in quad 3-4 games. So it's not as though they've stubbed their toe. Now there's been times where they've been in the desert, they've had droughts, but that happens over the course of the season. They're 6-9 in quad 1 games, 2-2 in quad 2 games. So you combine that, that's 8-11 in their quad 1 and 2 games. When they win, they shoot the ball well. And when they've struggled of late, it's offense has been the issue. And, you look at their first 19, 20 games, they were averaging 75 points per game. And now these last 10 games where they've been 3-7, if I'm not mistaken, they've been averaging 65 points per game. So almost 10 points less per game in terms of scoring. And their field goal percentage is down. It's been hovering around 41% in these last 10 games. And earlier in the year, they were 45 or better when we look at that sample size of their first 19 or 20 games. So now some of that's to be expected. You get into conference play, teams know one another, and there's less open shots. There's a compressed margin for error, and that comes with playing in a rugged conference like the Big Ten. The same is the case for the Big East when you look at these strong leagues. But with that said, obviously Archie Miller and his staff are putting their heads together to figure out, what they can do in terms of positioning their players to regain a little bit of that offensive punch or firepower they had in their outstanding start. Now, the good news, they've won enough games to where I think they're in good position. They wouldn't want to go out here with, losses to end the season and then the conference tournament go out in the first round. So as a head coach, having been on the other side of it, now being in the media, it's one thing to evaluate. But when I was a coach, my thinking was let's, control our own destiny, control our own fate by winning games and take the decision out of the selection committee's hands. So when your head hits the pillow on the eve of Selection Sunday, you're confident that you've done your work and now you're just concerned about what region or what seed that you get. And regardless of where you go or what numbers next to your name as a team, you got to win games. So playing well is really where I put the energy and the focus. And what we talked to our team about was let's not focus on the things we can't control. Let's focus on our next practice, our next game, and that's what will determine whether or not we ultimately punch our ticket and have a good seed and position ourselves to make a run because we're playing well at the right time of the year.
Yeah, Coach. And then finally, you began your career at Purdue under Gene Keady. I'm just curious, what kind of mentor was he, and how much fun is it to watch him still going out to games and just having a good time and, even being a little nervous as we saw last year during that NCAA tournament run?
Yeah, Coach Keady, 32 years ago, gave me an opportunity and showed the confidence in me to hire me at Purdue. And it was late 80s, early 90s, and I consider that to be one of the golden years or golden eras in Big Ten history. And you think of the coaches, not only Gene Keady at Purdue, Bob Knight at Indiana, Judd Heathcote at Michigan State, Lou Henson at Illinois, Tom Davis at Iowa, Bill Foster had come over from Duke at Northwestern, Clem Haskins at Minnesota. It was as good as it gets in terms of the history of college basketball and future Hall of Fame coaches. So as an apprentice working under Gene Keady, being able to watch these coaching giants go at it, on a nightly basis in Big Ten play, and just to be able to see the appreciation for basketball in terms of Big Ten fans. And that was my foundation. And Coach Keady has been someone that, other than my parents, has been the most influential as any in my life, and I couldn't have had a better mentor in terms of the way he led by example, his humility, his work ethic, his compassion for others, and that's why when I went to St. John's and became a head coach, it was such a treat to be able to bring him on staff, to be what I call my personal Mr. Miyagi, my basketball Buddha, my hoops oracle, and the relationships that you build, over the decades. And now I'm on my fourth decade associated with basketball as both a coach and a broadcaster. And that's what you carry forward, and the wins are nice, and being a part of championship-level basketball is something I take great pride in. But really, it goes back to the relationships, and Coach Katie was as good as it gets when you look at the history of basketball, his contributions at every level, starting as a high school coach and then a junior college coach and then assistant at the Division I level at Arkansas with Eddie Sutton, and then at Western Kentucky, head coach where he took them to the NCAA tournament, and then the 24, 25 years run at Purdue was really impressive. And even with USA Basketball winning gold medals and continuing with the NABC and his ambassadorship and being such a great diplomat for the game. And even coached at the NBA with the Toronto Raptors when he was an assistant up there or special assistant. So here's someone that's contributed at every level and came back to St. John's, also did some TV work with the Big Ten Network. I mean, you put that all together. To me, his body of work is the number one seed when it comes to mentors and puts him at the top of the list in the history of basketball because he cared about people and he did things the right way with integrity and continues with his family tree to have an influence on basketball when you look at Matt Painter and Bruce Weber and Link Darner and Conzo Martin and many others that he's had through the years, Alan Major, Kevin Stallings, Tom Ryder, who passed away, was an outstanding coach as well. So I'm just grateful that I had the opportunity. He's someone I love and care about dearly, and I was really fortunate to have such an outstanding teacher and mentor early in my career.
Well, Coach Lavin, we greatly appreciate all the knowledge and insight of your going on your fourth decade of basketball. Hard to believe how time flies, right?
Right, exactly. Gray hair.
It happens to all of us. But Anyway, again, greatly appreciate the time. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Okay, fellas, we'll do it again. Look forward to it. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Coach.
All right, that is Steve Lavin, and this is Kevin Brockway with Elton Hayes on the Big Stuff Podcast, signing off.